Hello, this is Robby,
And this is Emily.
and this is take two on the Stats Final Project, Finding the Formula for Success. We listened to our peers, made the changes, and this is a leaner, meaner version. So, here we go. So, for the introduction and background, the school counselors were interested in getting kids into college and fulfilling career paths. A lot of kids slip through the cracks, and our jobs prevent that from happening. There's plenty of research suggesting that GPA, a positive school climate, and visiting effective school counselors are some of the strongest indicators of college enrollment and post-secondary success. To be our most effective, we have decided to do a little digging.
For this research study, we used data from the 2022 Bayside Middle School Systemic Assessment. In looking at our data, we noticed that 85% of students have GPAs of 3.0 or higher. We also noticed that more than 75% of students have positive perceptions of the school environment. Data such as this would certainly suggest a relationship, but is it strong enough for one variable to influence the other? Could GPA be affected in such a way that it would lead to educational success for our students? We have a hunch that it can, but because a hunch is never a good formula for measurement, we have put our question to the test. A statistical test that could give us an actual formula for success, a linear equation that could be applied to the high achieving 4.0 student or the struggling zero point 0.5 GPA student. Will it work? Only time will tell. Research question. Does a student's level of counselor comfortability and school satisfaction affect GPA in such a way that it can be used as an indicator of future success in education?
Boom. So this is our methodology. We'll run two separate regression tests to determine the effect of our relationship of our independent and dependent variables. Our independent variables are counselor comfortability and school satisfaction. Our dependent variable is GPA. Both tests prove practical and statistically significant, then our study will have been a success. Linear equation of success. We have the null hypothesis below and then the alternative hypothesis. So take a look at that. Okay. And then for methodology, this is the second part of it. These are just some of the ways that we defined it. So counseling, comfortability, CC, we just have the responses. And school satisfaction, we just have the other responses. They don't line up exactly, and we'll talk about that later.
The systemic assessment surveyed several hundreds of students. However, we narrow our sample to an N of 306 students. Our sample population consists of the following subgroup. You'll see that on the screen, 15 and 16-year-old students of all genders and all ethnicities. We narrow our sample to 15 and 16-year-old students because by this age, GPA is a key function of education. Every year of high school adds or subtracts from this value. These ages not only imply greater attention to GPA, but also a variety of changes in social and emotional growth. The sum of these changes makes a student's level of counselor comfortability and school satisfaction all the more significant.
Cool. And then we have measures of central tendency. So basically in the frequency table and graph below, you'll notice that our sample GPA scores are highly homogeneous and negatively skewed. Our data bears little variability and our standard deviation is 0.556. Most of the GPAs are concentrated to the right of the mean. This isn't general. This is a little bit different than regular bell curve. So the GPA is 0.34 and roughly 80% of GPA lies above the mean.
The box and whisker plot provides a clear visual of the distribution of our data. Most GPAs are clustered between 3.2 and 3.9. Our maximum GPA is 4.0 and our minimum is 0.5. The box and whisker plot also zeroes in on outliers, our low achieving students with GPAs of 1.6, 1.5, 1.4, 0.9, and 0.5. And because our outliers and low variability, the median of 3.6 serves as the best representation of our data.
So here we have counselor comfortability. We're just going in the positive direction here. So 73% of students feel positive about visiting the school counseling office. And then school satisfaction, 79% of the students report feeling connected to the school.
And here's a look at our regression analysis. Our first regression analysis is between school satisfaction and GPA. At 5.06 times 10 to the negative sixth power, our R-square is far from the ideal value of 1, so we know that school satisfaction is not a practically significant indicator of GPA. At 0.97, our p-value is greater than both the f-stat and 5%. You'll also notice that our slope is 0. we cannot say with any degree of certainty that school satisfaction is a statistically significant determinant of GPA. So we retain the null hypothesis. Sorry, guys, no linear equation for this test. Our next regression analysis is between counselor comfortability and GPA. At 0.013, our R-square is far too small to indicate practical significance. This tells us that counselor comfortability is not a practically significant indicator of GPA. Our p-value is 0.0502, and though it is less than our f-stat, it is not less than 5%. It's right on the cusp, but even so, the p-value is greater than 5%. We cannot say with confidence that our test is statistically significant. How comfortable a student feels with a counselor is not a statistically significant indicator of GPA, so we retain the null hypothesis.
Cool. So we didn't find the linear equation we were hoping for, and we did discover some pretty significant things. So in working with our student sample, we realized that a number of variables have played a role in the outcome of our tests. However, we only considered the specific variables, so as we've already talked about. A closer look at our data reveals that the outlier students not only have the lowest GPA, but negative views of the school satisfaction as well. Fortunately, their comfort level with school counselors is high. On the flip side, the higher performing students had the highest school satisfaction, but the lowest counselor comfortability. So refocusing some of our attention to these students would be a great place to start.
And then we were so certain that a relationship existed between our data that we failed to check correlation levels prior to running our regression test. Turns out there was never much of a correlation from the start in our sample data. While this hardly implies that school satisfaction and counselor comfortability are not important, it does tell us that a student's level of school connectedness or school counselor comfortability do not determine GPA. Class lessons, small groups, and school-wide activities can be used to strengthen the school community, and school counselors can use pre-tests and post-tests as a way to assess and improve students' perceptions of the school. Finally, when it comes to education, great school counselors realize that GPAs are not the only indicator of success. Rather than try and mold the ideal 4.0 student, school counselors welcome differences and help to hone individual strengths and interests of each student. Success is personalized.
Yep. And then again, we're going to talk about this in limitations, but external variables may have played a role in the outcome of our test too. So the limitation of research. So issues regarding the number of scales on a variable exist. The structure of SS and CC response are the opposite of GPA score. So, that's sort of a big issue there. Surveys would be easier to navigate if questions maintain the same response style. So again, we'll go into that a little bit more, but we're potentially too narrow in our consideration of variables. So
we did not take ethnicity, gender, or a parent's college experience into consideration. Our data only includes one school sampling. However, there are 6 to 8 middle schools within a 12-mile radius of the school. Maybe other middle schools offer data that we are missing. We only considered 15 and 16-year-old students. It is possible that 13 and 14-year-old students offer a different perspective. And the survey might have captured the effect of student acclimating to post-COVID schooling, and thus the negative reactions towards school satisfaction.
So the counselor comfortability was based on 1, yes, 2, no, 3 sometimes, and then 4, like not really. And then obviously the SS was based on strongly agree, disagree, strongly disagree, and then there's some that didn't necessarily answer it or were uncertain. So if those were aligned, then obviously we'd be able to find better data. So we have some success suggestions for future results. And so we would suggest segmenting the students into thirds or smaller sample ranges. We're looking at the data into quarters, 20ths, or 15ths. That way we could figure out for the students who had a negative SS, why they might have that, where it comes from, so we can kind of zone out on those students specifically. So we want to investigate school culture, SS, to find out why 67% of the student base had a negative SS. Now, again, that's only a small percentage, but of that percentage, it's mostly on the bottom to middle GPA. We'd be interested to see what the counseling team is doing to have such a high positive number for all students, to work extremely well with 67% of the school population. This could be very useful for other counseling teams to utilize for training purposes. Um, the town environment may offer some potential answers. This is just some of the demographic information we found. So students are upper middle class to lower high, like rich households. They're more elite academically and financially. There's only 2.2 students under the poverty line. Adults are educated with about 50% college graduates and are primarily white, 92%. This potentially will impact their data as half the families already know how to navigate college. And then again, we want to look at multiple rural, suburban, and urban schools. The suburban nature of the school would factor into ethnicity. Our BIPOC population only make up about 8% of our segment, and it might explain the lower ranges of SS, as white spaces can be hard to navigate.
And I think that's it. We really appreciate you listening to our final project. We hope you enjoy it and hope it drives you to investigate new things and discover what you can do as a school counselor to really help your students. Thanks and have a good one.
Yep, take care.